Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got some good news for you. It's Thanksgiving this week. You'll get some time off. You'll hopefully spend time with family and friends. And I hope you enjoyed the fact that there's going to be Thanksgiving this week because we have no good martinis for you today. There's a bad, and crazy. And so let's start with bad number one. Jim, we got a flurry of cabinet nominations on late Friday afternoon, early Friday evening. Usually, first of all, these announcements are made in person, but they're all done by press release now, which is fine. No problem with that. The problem is with some of the names that are coming out. There were some good ones on Friday that came out. Russ Vought's going to be back running OMB, assuming he gets confirmed. I have no reason to think he won't. Dr. Marty Makary to run FDA, I think, is an excellent choice. I would have preferred him to run all of HHS. Just a brilliant guy in terms of dealing with the cost of healthcare and chronic diseases and all that stuff. He's a renowned surgeon on top of everything else, but he's a very gifted communicator, and I think he's got good conservative instincts. And there's some others in there that I think people will probably not have any problems with, but there are definitely some we do have problems with, and those need to be called out here as the main thrust of this first bad martini. First of all, right on the out of the gate is Lori Chavez-DeRemer, was an Oregon congresswoman for 2 years, narrowly lost her re-election bid, and she was pushed hard by Teamsters Union President Sean O'Brien, who you might remember Trump gave the primetime hour on the opening night of the convention to, where he denigrated the idea of right to work and praising the people who were now against it, like Josh Hawley of Missouri. There were a lot of folks who, once O'Brien was on board with DeRemer, saying, no, you gotta, Mr. President, don't do this. But he does it. And here's part of the letter from the National Right to Work Committee that was pushing him not to do it. This was before the nomination was actually made, pointing out that Lori Chavez-DeRemer was one of very few Republicans who supported the PRO Act, which basically kills freelance work. It makes anyone who does any work for anybody an actual employee, which means they need full benefits, which means employers can't spend that kind of money on people who do a limited amount of work. National Right to Work Committee says the bill's most destructive provision is to invalidate the right to work laws that 26 states have passed to ensure that workers cannot be forced to pay dues to a union. As you know, right to work laws do exactly one thing. They make union dues a voluntary choice. In a right to work state, a worker can join a union and pay union dues if he wants, but he cannot ever be fired for choosing not to do so. Lori Chavez-DeRemer refused to co-sponsor the National Right to Work Act, which would have given right to work protections to everyone in her home state of Oregon, and instead supported legislation that would take away those protections from millions of Americans in other states. In addition, as D.C.'s government unions are gearing up to resist your administration's attempts to reform the federal bureaucracy, Chavez-DeRemer is a co-sponsor of the laughably misnamed Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act, which would force every state and local government in the country to bargain with union bosses who claim to represent government workers. You know, basically, good luck getting smaller government when you're pushing that sort of thing. The other big name that came out on Friday night was Scott Bessent for Treasury. He's listed in an Axios article, which kind of cheerleads these picks as saying, ooh, this is going to be an ideologically diverse cabinet. That's how they react when Republicans pick people who drift leftwards. It never works the other way. They call him a former George Soros advisor who now promises Trumponomics will turn around the economy. But advisor's a little thin. According to Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt, Bessent joined Soros Fund Management in 1991 and was a partner there throughout the 1990s, eventually becoming head of the London office, and was a leading member of the team whose bet on the Black Wednesday collapse of the British pound garnered over $1 billion for the firm. So he's good at selling short. The Soros people love disaster. They make a ton of money off of chaos. So, Jim, these are two pretty significant picks, and I think they are deeply flawed.
Yeah. So we spent a good part of the last 4 years, really before more than 4 years, hearing about how one of the reasons Trump was not as effective a president as he or some of his supporters wanted during his first term was he was constantly being undermined, being sabotaged, right, by all the types like, H.R. McMaster and James Mattis, Bolton, Rex Tillerson, right? Apparently, the problem was there were all these people in the cabinet who weren't really on board with the true Trump agenda, and they were working against him from day one. Well, if you subscribe to that theory, and my sense is, first of all, well, that's not a great reflection on Trump if he keeps hiring people who are whose whole agenda is contrary to his own. Well, you really want to be more careful the second time around, and you want to make sure that everybody is absolutely on board with what you want to do and what your agenda is. Oh, no, let's put the AFL-CIO pick at Labor. What's the worst that could happen, right? You know, the irony is when you make these kind of picks, you pick a Matt Gaetz. Well, really, very few people on Capitol Hill like him. So some undetermined number of Senate Republicans. We heard, you know, minimum 4, but let's face it, there was rumors going around it was a dozen. Some people said 30. Whole bunch of Senate Republicans are like, this is not going to work. We're not going to vote for this guy. And you know, not a single Senate Democrat was going to vote for this guy. Now with these, Chavez-DeRemer is probably, the Senate Democrats are probably like, this is the best pick we're going to get for Secretary of Labor. We will be cheerleading. We will be the one defending her. We'll do everything we can. Don't worry, you got 47 votes, and we just got to find 4 Republicans to go with you. Never mind, keep 4 Republicans from going the other direction. On Scott Bessent, I heard this argument that, well, George Soros is a multi-billionaire, extremely successful in markets and investing and looking at the business world. And that really Scott Bessent kind of learned at his knee just about that stuff, not about all the bad stuff that makes him sound like a Bond villain. And as a part of it, if I'm a Republican senator, I want to ask a lot of questions about that. I want to ask a lot of questions one-on-one in my office, and I want to ask a lot of questions during the public hearing, because that's conceivable, but it's just kind of bizarre that Trump gets elected, swept into office, question of whether he has 50%, but a big popular vote win. And one of the first things he just, I'm going to put this guy who worked with George Soros for a lot of years in charge of Treasury, one of the most important cabinet posts. Don't worry, folks, it's going to turn out okay. Is it? And it's not just a matter of, I think this guy is going to sabotage from the inside. I just think that if you'd spent that much time with Soros, I really want to make sure it's, I don't want to say he's got Soros cooties, but I want to make sure that that none of the Soros worldview has gotten in there. Now, obviously, if you're in the Trump crowd, probably you didn't. But I just, when you get into the nitty gritty of financial decisions, is he going to be making decisions in a free market, limited government, this right of center conservative vision? And or is this a case where that, they say the horseshoe, is this a part where he's kind of leftist populism will align with rightist populism? Republicans should be very skeptical and ask a lot of questions in both of these cases. I too am, really waiting to be convinced on that. But in this one, Senate Democrats might be ready to rescue these nominees, and we'll see how this shakes out. But this is not the start I want, that a bunch of conservatives wanted to see from the Trump administration, at least in these two positions.
And you're right about the Democrats. They're absolutely going to be perfectly fine with both of these. And so you could get a half a dozen Republican defections based on concerns about the nominations, or maybe even more than that. And it's not going to make any difference. As long as they don't get pulled for some other reason, they're going to be confirmed. And big opportunities missed in that situation. And so as far as I know, Bessent left Soros on good terms. I haven't heard otherwise. And so that's not an encouraging sign, because Soros was not exactly coy about his political positions even in the late 90s. So
yeah, no, he was not shy.
We didn't even get to Dr. Oz. He wasn't one of the Friday nominations, but Dr. Oz is going to run Medicare services. Okay. Fhonest to goodness, the funniest and actually genuinely good thing. So you know who said he's open to voting for Mehmet Oz?
Fetterman? John Fetterman. He said he's not guaranteeing. He just said that he has no bad blood or hard feelings over the race in there, and that he's got a bunch of questions for him. He's not convinced, but he's open to it. And Fetterman had also said that he's already on board with Rubio, and I think that's a right attitude. And if he'd said, I'm not voting for that SOB, everybody would understand after the hard race that they ran against each other. But in the end, time passes and there are different roles now. These are administrative jobs. I don't know if Mehmet Oz wants to spend his whole day meeting with government officials and trying to get them to enact changes that they don't want to make. I just figure hosting a TV show is going to be a lot more fun. But hey, whatever. Also, Greg, do you remember how many times you saw Mehmet Oz making the argument for Trump, Republicanism, conservatism, or anything like that since Election Day 2022?
Not a lot.
Nope, not a single thing. Yeah.
Incredible. Well,
it's amazing. Politics is it's like a light switch. You just turn it on and off when you're in the mood to be a political figure.
To Fetterman's credit, your director of Medicare and Medicaid services can be from New Jersey. You just don't want your Pennsylvania senators
there you go. Yes,
to be from New Jersey, which
don't care where he
really
resides.
would cost him the race. But in any event, could have done better. Let's hope we're pleasantly surprised by some of these people, but I'm not going to hold my breath. All right. Well, if Republicans abandoning the right to work wasn't bad enough, let's talk about something else, and that's the skinny House majority. There's still 3 House races that haven't been called yet. Today is November 25th. It's been 20 days since Election Day. And yeah, they're close, but you only have so many votes, right? And they're still not done counting in 3 districts. 2 in California, of course, and 1 in Iowa. Right now, Michelle Steele, the congresswoman from the Orange County area, is down by a little more than 500 votes, and it looks like just about all the votes are in. Further north in California, in the 13th district, John Duarte is up by about 200 votes on Adam Gray. It says 99% counted, so hopefully they're just about done there. And then in a race that hasn't changed at all, Marionette Miller Meeks, who you might remember won by 6 votes 2 years ago, well, she was leading by about 800 votes as of right now against her Democratic challenger. There's going to be a recount that Miller Meeks calls a waste of taxpayer money. I'd be surprised that if 800 votes changed on a recount. So if these statistics don't change, Jim, it'll be 221 to 214. But keep in mind, Republicans are looking at 3 immediate vacancies come the new House session, with Gates resigning, Mike Waltz about to become National Security Advisor, and Elise Stefanik, I assume, going to be confirmed as UN ambassador. And so then you're down to 218, 214. A couple people that missed their flight, a couple people flipped. It's not going to take a lot to thwart the Republican agenda. So it's going to be some tough sledding in the House, although it's pretty much what it's been the last 2 years. So hopefully Mike Johnson knows what he's doing a little more in the first 2 years.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, out in Iowa, yes, 800 votes is a landslide. George W. Bush would tell you 800 votes is a landslide based on it being 537, I believe, in Florida back then. In that case, that's a case of like the automatic recount laws probably seemed like a good idea at the time. And you're like, oh, my goodness, well, if it's within 0.5% or 1% or whatever the threshold is in various states, well, we should probably do a recount to be sure. What they don't necessarily realize is that like 1% can be a lot depending on the number of votes that are out there. I kept pointing out how Colin Allred in this Texas Senate race, people say he's within 4%. I'd say, yeah, but like in a state like Texas, it's like 440,000 votes. That's not a small amount. And very similar story in statewide races in places like Florida. In a congressional race, it's going to be smaller. You're generally looking at lower end 6-figure totals, but very tough to just find 800 votes in a desk drawer or something like that. So, and in California, like the other thing about the fact that they're still counting in California. Florida had arguably the most embarrassing experience any state could have in 2000, and then set about fixing it. Like as much as any state can have antiquated voting equipment, and because it's usually not that close, nobody pays that much close attention. Ballot designs, butterfly ballot, but they had a really embarrassing, and then they fixed it, and now they are the gold-plated, gold standard role model of how you should be counting the votes. I was down there last week, and everybody I spoke to was bragging about how quick they count their votes. This is, California has been like several cycles now, where it's like a month goes by and they still haven't been able to call some races, and everybody just kind of seems cool with it. And I don't know if that reflects like the legalization of weed, or the fact that it's sunshine, or California, whatever it is. Everybody in California, okay, well, it's been a great election, everybody. We'll let you know in 6 weeks who won. That just doesn't seem. But they're just very laid back about it. And then in terms of the president's cabinet appointments, I think it's safe to say when we saw Gates drop out and Bondi named as the replacement attorney general nominee within a matter of hours, this has been a very disciplined, focused, well-run transition so far, knocking on wood. We don't love all these picks, as we said earlier. But, I think this is the earliest we've had the entire cabinet, named as potential. And maybe part of it's that you don't need to do an in-person press conference. It's just rolling out on, press releases or Truth Social or however Trump's announcing it. But, for each one of them, they had a backup. There's always a chance that somebody says, Mr. President, I got kids in college. I can't afford to work in government right now, or I'm just not interested, or something like that. Look, Waltz seems like a great pick for National Security Advisor. He does not require Senate confirmation. Right. So he'll be able to step right in on January 20th. I understand he's already getting briefings, or, that process will begin very quickly. But again, it's a conservative district, but that means that seat is empty for a stretch. Stefanik, similar story. There had to be somebody else who was like second in line, who was the second choice. And I kind of feel like at some point, do you reach a point where you're like, you're a great person and we'd really love to have you in this job, but you're in the House and we need you to be in the House. And maybe at some point down the road, when Mike Johnson has a slightly, thicker cushion, he can free you up to go work in the executive branch somewhere. It's I still believe the president should get the people he wants, but these are pretty unusual circumstances. And I'd hate to see, as you mentioned, the flight delays. Look, the other thing is, I hate to say, every year in the new economy, people die.
Yeah.
You have a decent number of people who are getting up there in years. Decent number of people who end up having health issues. The idea that, you are one terrible plane crash away from having a Democratic House majority probably ought to be a factor in the presidential appointee decisions. These folks ran for re-election. They intended to serve in the House. Maybe it's best to keep them there. We'll see how this shakes out, but we are unnervingly close to a Democratic House, which is very bizarre considering the good year. Also, for a forthcoming column, Republicans had a good year in state legislatures too. They flipped the Michigan House. The Minnesota House went from a 6-seat Democratic majority to a evenly split. So Tim Walz just had a brutal year every possible way. So a really great one, except in the House of Representatives. Hopefully this doesn't come back to bite Republicans in the butt.
Exactly. And every vacancy takes a few months to fill. Ron DeSantis is getting grief for the fact that this race to replace Matt Gaetz, the final election, because there has to be a primary as well, isn't going to be till early April. And he's saying, look, by law, this is the earliest I can do this, even with Gaetz resigning now, as opposed to, later on for like when Stefanik gets confirmed. If she waits till then to resign, that starts the clock. And Kathy Hochul doesn't necessarily need to rush to fill that seat and schedule the election accordingly. I assume, given the districts, all three of these will probably be won by Republicans, but it could be well after the first 100 days in some of them, certainly in New York. Whether the clock's already ticking on the Mike Waltz seat, I'm not sure. There hasn't been as much scrutiny on that one as the Gaetz seat, but we'll see. Well, way better than a very small majority is a huge amount of quality meat coming to your house just in time for the holidays. And I'm telling you what, you cannot go wrong with Omaha steaks. These steaks are amazing. So tender, so much great flavor. They give you stuff to make the marinade and spices. And so you can use their stuff. You can use your own. The meat is terrific. The burgers are fantastic. They've also got the seafood, the chicken, the wine, the sides, the dessert. The steak cut fries are incredible. And right now, the fantastic deal they've got going on for their Cyber Monday sale. Save 50% site-wide at omahasteaks.com during the Cyber Monday sale. Plus, get an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML and a $30 reward card when you shop early. Look, I know it's November 25th, exactly 1 month till Christmas. You still have people you haven't bought for. You're still wondering what to get them. If you know they like steaks, you know they like burgers, get them Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com and save 50% off site-wide during their Cyber Monday sale. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, Jim, we've spent our first two martinis looking at what Republicans are doing, first in the incoming Trump administration and then the very narrow majority coming in the House of Representatives. So how are the Democrats doing, especially those in bureaucratic positions? Let's say the State Department. Oh, not good, apparently. Not good. According to the Free Beacon, which originally broke this story, Darrell Issa, who is a longtime member of the House and is right now in the running to become chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is asking the State Department for answers in disclosing how much it spent on private therapy sessions for employees grappling with Trump's victory. The request comes on the heels of a Free Beacon report detailing at least 2 therapy sessions held at the State Department in the wake of this month's election. Sources described one informal meeting held for Near Eastern Affairs Bureau staffers as a quote-unquote cry session over Trump's win. An agency-wide email also touted, quote, an insightful webinar where we delve into effective stress management techniques to help you navigate these challenging times, unquote. That webinar was held on November 8th, 3 days after Trump's win, and another was scheduled for November 13th. Says Issa, it is disturbing that ostensibly nonpartisan government officials would suffer a personal meltdown over the results of a free and fair election, something the United States champions around the world. It's unacceptable that the department accommodates this behavior and subsidizes it with taxpayer dollars. The mental health of our foreign service personnel is important, but the department has no obligation to indulge and promote the leftist political predilections of its employees and soothe their frayed nerves because of the good faith votes of and at the personal expense of the American taxpayers. And so, Jim, if they're looking for people to thin out the bureaucracy, this would be a good place to start in the State Department, because I'm pretty sure people who have this type of emotional reaction aren't going to be super gung-ho to implement the agenda from the incoming administration. But this would not have happened in Gen X. This would not have happened in generations before that. What do you make of actual department personnel needing a cry session to deal with an election that shouldn't have come as a massive surprise?
Greg, you made a reference to Gen X. But apparently while I was gone, you criticized Gen X. I didn't listen to what I heard, No,
that was a misinterpretation. Where I was talking to John Gabriel, and he was saying that unlike other people, whining about stuff, Gen X would just have a stiff drink, and I agreed with that. So
okay,
that's
all right. So, so see, we are highly functional alcoholics. He says on a podcast called The Three Martini Lunch, right? So I just want to point out when people say, Gen X, isn't so fragile, it isn't so sensitive. Let's face it, we were raised by, at least in my case, Dennis Miller, Dennis Leary, Sam Kinison, Andrew Dice Clay, Eddie Murphy Raw, right? Like when some younger millennial or Gen Z looks like, oh my God, you were raised by wolves. Really? By your standards, I was, right? Okay, nothing was sacred, nothing was above being mocked. But having said that, I want to look at the upside. I'm trying to be more positive as we approach the end of the year. And Greg, if the U.S. State Department sold video of the cry sessions, how much would you pay to watch? You put this on pay-per-view, it would do Netflix, Jake Paul, Mike Tyson viewer numbers. You could run a streaming service just based on the cry sessions of federal employees after the election results. People would pay. Newsmax is looking for that deal right now. So yes, this is of course absurd and ridiculous. And I think this is kind of the ultimate triumph of the therapeuticization of every problem in American life. I am not anti-therapy. I am not anti-talking to a psychologist or psychiatrist. That can do you a lot of good. Some of our sponsors have recommended ways to, get people talking about their feelings. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you need help, it's nothing wrong with reaching out for it. Having said that, your employer may or may not be the right venue for whatever is bothering you, particularly if it's not directly related to your workplace. And I blame this mindset of bring your whole self to work. And I have had vehement arguments with people who think, no, this is first of all, this is what the millennials and Gen Z are, that they expect to bring their whole self to work. They expect you to address their anxieties and inner emotional health and all of that. And poop rolls downhill was the slogan at my first workplace. I mean, there was no expectation that your bosses and that the institute, forget emotional therapy. I couldn't get tech support for my computers at some of these wires. You were your own tech support, right? I considered a good week if my paycheck didn't bounce. Do you guys want, an on-staff therapist to talk about your feelings? So, You should not bring your whole self to work. Your workplace doesn't need your whole self. You're entitled to have a private life. And by the way, I think some of this is someone goes online and you say something very controversial. Unless it directly affects their work, that's none of your business. You let them be who they want to be off the clock. And then on the clock, you have a job to be professional, do your job, focus on it, treat everyone with courtesy and respect, and get the job done. And that's what the working world is all about. I've seen more of that meme of a short scene from Mad Men, where a younger female employee complains to Don Draper, "You never once thanked me for any of my ideas or anything I've done." And he says, "That's what the money was for," which is honestly if you can find a great boss who is indeed a mentor, who is indeed a sounding board, somebody who you can talk about primarily work stuff, but maybe this is somebody who you look to for guidance in family matters, in how do you deal with it when everything gets overwhelming and all that stuff. great. That's a blessing. Count your blessings if you can find something like that. But your boss isn't really obligated to be that. Your boss is obligated to be your boss, to keep keep the widgets going out the factory door, keep the wheels turning, keep the lights on, and a lot of this, keep the money coming in, because that's what sustains the operation. State Department government work's a little bit different, but really in the end, like the other thing is I've dealt with a lot of people who were shocked by these election results, who really were depressed by it. And they go to me, Jim, you don't know what this is like. And I'm like, I haven't had an election I liked the result of since 2004. What are you kidding me? This is bad news all the time. So get used to it. This is, like, eventually you develop that thick skin. You get used to disappointment and frustration. I think there's a little bit like, and by the way, if the worst thing that ever happens to you is that the election turns out a way you didn't want it to, you're living an okay life. There was somebody who said after Trump got elected, it was the darkest day in American history. And I know that person was alive for 9/11. So I'm like, no, it's not. You look at the Great Recession, it may not be the worst day in a decade. So there's kind of this obsessive mania about making everything in your life staked on the result of an election. Ultimately, something you have very limited control over the outcome. So in the end, control the controllables, focus on what you can do in life, and accept there are certain things in life you can't change. And just a variation of, is it the Lord's Prayer? But either way, go through life and recognize it's not your boss's job to be your therapist and make you feel okay with things. Get back to work.
And if you can't do the work for the next administration, then Elon and Vivek are like the Bobs in Office Space. They're gonna come in and probably replace you here. Here's one of the weird things, Jim. And they say that sources described one informal meeting held for Near Eastern Affairs Bureau staffers. Near Eastern Affairs includes the Middle East and North Africa. If you compare the status of the Middle East now compared to 4 years ago.
Look, I'm sure all these people, I'm sure Trump's election is much, much worse than watching all those 10/7 videos. And all the other, like it's the Middle East, right? Beheadings are what happened only on days ending in a Y. The idea that Trump's election is going to upset you more than it's kind of, like perspective. It'd be really nice to have around here.
Exactly. And it's the Middle East, so we can't promise that things aren't going to get worse. Things are always volatile there. But when you look at the last 4 years, it's not exactly trending in the right direction. But anyway, we'll see what happens with the new administration. Jim, anyway, quite a start to the week. Hopefully we'll have some good martinis tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Those really do help. Please find us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Monday. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.